Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining this Electric webinar on accelerating fleet electrification. We call it eVision because that's our eVision for the future. We have a stellar lineup to discuss this topic today. My name is Peter Georgiev, and I'm the policy advisor for electric mobility at Electric. For those of you who are new to Electric, we are the trade association that represents the European electricity industry in Brussels. Welcome to our eVision series. The European power sector is moving quite fast towards decarbonizing the power supply. And one of our main work streams these days really focuses on the way and the role of electricity to accelerate the decarbonization of transport. But we still have a long way to go. Policies have put us in the right direction, and we must stay this ambitious course. Still, we need to see assertive climate action and climate decision-making on the side of businesses. Our industry is very much determined to lead the charge in the transition to electric mobility. And through this webinar today, we really want to kickstart the discussion on fleet electrification, mostly in the focus of Europe, of course, in the context of Europe, and announce our upcoming flagship event on this topic, eVision, that will take place on the 2nd of February. And I will mention some words about it later on today. For the time being, we know that this event will take place with the support of our partners such as Ernst & Young, Edp, and Drives, and we've also partnered up with Bloomberg New Energy Finance, the Energy Web Foundation, and EV100. So definitely stay tuned and join us on our quest to accelerate the electrification of transport from this direction. Now, fleet electrification is of paramount importance to the success of the transition in the transport sector. A lot of focus now falls on the passenger car segment, but we all know that there are significant opportunities for vans, buses, and trucks. And EV fleets have lowered total cost of ownership. They disrupt the reliance on fossil fuel imports, and other benefits are out there. But I'm sure our speakers today will tell you a lot more about all of this. And I would like to move to the two keynote speeches that we have prepared for you today. After that, we will discuss some key points with business leaders and policymakers. A bit of housekeeping in the meantime. To all of you who are out there following the discussion, thanks again for joining. And we really want to give you the opportunity to chip in as well to this discussion. So type in your questions in the box as shown on the slide just right now. If you could please go to the next slide so you can see. And type your questions there in the comment box, and we will try to put them forward to the participants. Now, without further ado, I would like to give the floor to our first keynote speaker, Michael Liebreich. Michael is a leading global expert on clean energy, transportation, smart infrastructure, climate finance, and sustainable development. Michael founded the New Energy Finance in 2004 and is a true veteran and pioneer of the green transition with countless achievements. Hello, Michael. Are you with us right now?
Hello there. Hello there. It's a great pleasure to be with you. As you can see, lockdown, but still working on these issues.
That's great to hear. Please take us away.
Okay, so you should now be seeing my screen. Perhaps somebody could confirm that you can see it, and I will begin. What I can do, I've got 10 minutes, and I want to frame what was happening before COVID, what is happening during COVID, and some thoughts on what happens next, particularly looking at from the perspective of e-mobility. So if we go back to before COVID and just big picture, before we start on mobility, I think it's important to understand that we were making tremendous progress on not just the clean energy transition, but also transportation. Here you can see historic emissions, and it's always very easy for the activists to say, as Greta Thunberg said, you grown up to doing nothing and everything is a failure. But the fact is that over the past 6 years, we had actually seen enormous progress on reaching the peak of emissions, or towards the peak. So in the last 6 years, since 2013, the global GDP had grown by 23%, but emissions only by 3%. And so at the end of last year, I wrote a piece saying that we are much closer to peak emissions than we might think. And again, by way of context, of course, some of that was coal to gas switching, particularly in the US, and some was energy efficiency. But a lot of it, a big piece of it, was also the transition to renewables. You can see there that the percentage of electricity from non-hydro renewables had grown to 11% in 2019, from 1% or 2% just a decade or two before. So it's very important to bear that in mind, because of course mobility with its batteries works well with renewables. So big picture, we were making huge progress, and a lot of that was down to renewables. Now, I had the great pleasure of speaking at the Eurelectric event in Florence in May last year, so just over a year ago, and I pointed out the tremendous growth in electric vehicles. You can see there growing in all regions of the world. Well, it's a year later. There's been, I would say, a little bit of a wobble in Asia, reductions of support mechanisms. The US, where of course gasoline prices are very low, and that gets translated through to the user very quickly. Also, maybe a little bit of a wobble, but you see the trend continues. And overall, though, we still see these tremendous compound annual growth rates. Here you can see the percentage of new sales which are electric, country by, or in some of the leading countries and the EU. And you can see a lot of places. It's not, of course, Norway is at 75% cars with plugs and in the sales figures, but even in other countries, larger markets, we're now seeing 2 to 5%, maybe even peaking higher for China a year or so ago. But now we're starting to see much larger segments switching to electric vehicles. Now, of course, a big piece of that is that the battery costs have come down. The economic penalty to buy an electric vehicle has been dramatically reduced. Total cost of ownership basis, in many cases, eliminated. And here you can see a drop in the battery prices over the last decade of over 85%. Now, it's not just that the batteries got cheaper, they also became better. And you can see here an improvement in the battery, the cell density, something like an 80% improvement in the last 9 years. So it's a dramatic improvement in performance. And by the way, also improvement in the number of cycles. We're approaching the 1,000,000-mile battery, the battery that will last for 10,000 cycles in an automotive environment. And you see the number of models, up by incredible numbers, 640% by 2022. So obviously the manufacturers are putting out the models. And you see then also the range. This is an example from China, but these improvements, the reduction in cost of batteries, the improvement in battery performance, and the launch of new models means that the consumer is getting better and better vehicles. Also, the charging infrastructure, a bit closer to home for the Eurelectric crowd. You can see there enormous growth in the availability of charging. The numbers are just ridiculous because, of course, in 2010 there was almost none, and now there's quite a bit. So we see consistent growth in charging infrastructure. And of course, we've also seen a lot of cities and regions wanting to phase out the internal combustion engine, largely, it must be said, for air quality reasons. But you see an increasing number of cities having lower tolerance for the pollution from internal combustion engines. Of course, particularly diesel, of course, particularly in Asia and Europe, but this is a trend that is not going backwards. Now, the manufacturers, of course, have also realized, and here you can see the kind of iconic decision very visually by Daimler. For the first time in 135 years, they no longer have a development program for passenger vehicles, for light transport that is based around the internal combustion engine. 135 years, there's always been diesel and petrol engines in the plans, in the program, being sold and the next generation being developed. That is now no longer the case. And you see this decision echoed across the board pretty much. There's a few companies faster and a few holdouts that are still talking about fuel cells. We'll get onto that. But mainly the large manufacturers are now all backing the electrification horse and no other horse. Now, of course, it's not just cars. These are two-wheelers, transformational effect, and we've seen some of that during COVID, where even in London now it is legal to use a shared scooter. But obviously, this trend started in Asia with hundreds of millions of electric two-wheelers. We're also seeing buses. Starting in Asia, Shenzhen, 16,000 electric buses, Transport for London, where I was on the board, very proud of having a few hundred electric buses. But we're now seeing a one-way street to electrification of urban buses, and longer distance buses now starting to creep into the discourse. And I know that I chair a very small bus company that does commuter peri-urban services. And of course, we at Zelo are also looking at using electric buses for that purpose. Commercial vehicles, we've seen an enormous number of announcements, everything from the small vans to the Amazon delivery vehicles, and of course an active debate about heavier vehicles. And in the background, perhaps not getting quite the same amount of attention, we've seen the autonomous delivery. The flying drones are probably not going to be a vast thing anytime soon, but on-street delivery vehicles are actually progressing fairly fast during COVID. They weren't quite ready to commercialize at scale during the lockdowns, but they have made enormous strides. And a whole range of professional vehicles, garbage trucks, and a lot of the drivers for this are not to do with climate, they're actually to do with performance. An electric garbage truck is largely silent. You know, if anybody out there has ever been woken up by a garbage truck, you'll know that this is kind of a big deal. And the torque and the power is very attractive for certain other classes of professional vehicle. So that was kind of before the COVID pandemic struck. This is an incredibly positive, momentum-filled picture. So let's turn to what has happened. And obviously, we know the first thing was this tremendous sort of shutdown, the lockdown, and that hit transport volumes. But there's another thing going on, which is the destruction of balance sheets, individual balance sheets, corporate balance sheets, investor balance sheets, governmental balance sheets. At the moment, they're printing money, but that will not go on forever. And that is going to have an impact on that momentum for change, because what we've seen, what I've seen in the last nearly 2 decades, is that when the economy flourishes, then the transition goes faster. So we're likely to see a slowing down. This is road congestion. You can see, obviously, in some parts of the world, the road traffic is bouncing back. In other parts, they're still in the depths of the lockdown. But we already see also changes in behavior. So we need to bear those in mind, as well as the issues of whether there is the funding to invest and so on. So this is an example from the UK. As people return to work, they don't want to use public transport. And so they're going back into cars. And you can see there that the two bottom lines, tube and buses, are recovering very slowly. But the lines that are associated with personal transportation and, of course, freight, bouncing back much more quickly. The line at the top is cycling. We're also going to see changes, sticky changes to cities and infrastructure. But this has implications, of course, for what you want to electrify and how fast you want to electrify it, and also for congestion, air quality, and the associated societal pressure for change. We see changes in buying behavior. 40% year-on-year increase in downloading of delivery apps. So delivery fleets become absolutely critical. We're going to talk about fleets today. Delivery fleets, the companies running them are having a good pandemic. They are making money, and mayors and municipalities need to be forcing them to accelerate their shift to electric fleets for air quality reasons alone, of course, and others. There's also going to be changes. Look at what we're doing here. We are not meeting in person. We're meeting, and I believe it'll be a very effective meeting. We're meeting electronically, and who knows whether business travel will recover, who knows where the holiday making patterns will return. But clearly, the hospitality and travel industry, with all its demands for energy and transportation, is not going to be the same for some considerable time. Will they have the cash to invest in new and exciting technologies around electrification? The answer is most likely no. Now, post-COVID, of course, there's a lot of uncertainty here because we are still in a health crisis. We are by no means out of the woods. We also don't know what the governmental response is going to be. This is just a very quick chart. Don't bother trying to read it all, but we all know that there's a vibrant debate about green stimulus. The EU is clearer than anywhere else about what it wants, but even that has not been pushed through. So we need to see what government response can and will be by 2021. BNEF, summarizing all of that, has changed its outlook. Blue is 2019, purple is 2020, but broadly speaking, after the hit from COVID, the Bloomberg New Energy Finance sort of prognosis for electrification has not changed. It's actually the same sorts of penetrations of electric expected over time through to 2040, around a third of the fleet, more than half of sales. And I just want to finish on one thing. I promised we'd touch on fuel cells. They're really over as a contender for private cars, but you can see there some interest in fuel cells in the out years amongst Bloomberg New Energy Finance and a lot of the public and the commentators. This is fuel cells have clearly not. Oops, I'm just dismissing my timer I set for 10 minutes. There you can see for private cars, no sign of fuel cells working, and it's all to do with the efficiency of the conversions into and out of electricity. I keep sending this message. It is vital that everybody understands anything you can do with a battery rather than a fuel cell, rather than hydrogen, you should on efficiency grounds. And I'll finish with this discussion, if you like, about long distance and heavy transportation. Again, very relevant for the fleet discussion, because there is a consensus that batteries will be very difficult for the long distance transportation, and that is a segment where hydrogen has a very good chance of being the dominant provider. It's not a done deal. There are certainly those who think you'll be able to charge trucks fast enough as people take a rest break. If autonomy doesn't come in and change the rules, you'll still have drivers. You'll be able to charge the trucks. Of course, huge implications on the infrastructure and electrical system, but that is the debate, batteries versus fuel cells. However, I want to throw into the mix for discussion the solution of catenaries, particularly when you link it with platooning. And you have vehicles that have a battery, but they can be charged en route, not all the time, maybe every 150 miles, you have 30 or 40 miles of charging, and you platoon the vehicles because they're in a lane with a catenary. And this is a very, very elegant solution and potentially a much cheaper solution than either vast batteries, which you'd need on the left, or a completely new hydrogen infrastructure and the efficiency losses associated. It is an open discussion. We by no means have all the data and analysis to say which one's going to win, but I throw that into the mix for discussion. And with that, I will hand back to our moderator. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michael. That was really very interesting outlook on what we see in terms of main trends, also pre and post this really big disturbance that we see right now with the health crisis. And to all our viewers right now, I want to also mention that Michael will stay with us during the whole event, and you will have the chance to ask him a question during our Q&A session later on. But with that being said, let's move on. We have a second keynote speech for us here today, and with us we have Vera Pinto Pereira. She's the executive board member at Energias de Portugal, EDP, and also president of the board for EDP Commercial. I now invite Vera to share the utility perspectives on different ways that we're electrifying transport. So Vera, please.
Hi, good morning. Thank you, Peter. It's a pleasure to be with you today. Great to listen to Michael's insights into the subject. I will take you. I will give you the perspective on an integrated utility approaching this mobility arena. If we could please go to the first slide. There are basically three key ideas that set the stage for how we as a utility think about our mobility agenda. The first, obviously, is more than ever fighting climate change is urgent. And as Michael put it, after this pandemic, it's more than obvious that the world's recovery must be green. The second, obviously, is that mobility will play a key role in this energy transition. And the third is that we feel that it is companies that are able to connect the dots between customer needs and understanding their pains in this energy transition and their requirements, technology and regulation, that we will be eligible players in the mobility ecosystem. So it's upon these three pillars that I will share a view and explain how we have built our mobility agenda. Next slide, please. Thank you. So again, just for context, and Michael took us through this message. Obviously, I mean, climate change is here. In fact, 2019 was the warmest year ever, and with it, severe consequences. And one of the few positive takeaways that we could get out of this pandemic crisis is that we lived through a significant reduction in CO2 emission, about 17% reduction between April and 2020 and April 2019. However, this decrease is obviously not sustainable. I mean, the world's economy cannot stop, and this cannot be the answer to CO2 reduction. So, world economy needs to recover, and it needs to recover in a sustainable way. So, I just say that now more than ever, European policy and investment for a green economy has become absolutely critical as we now face an urgent recovery, because we've a lot of countries in Europe have been put in a very fragile situation. But whatever our rebound, whatever it looks like, it needs to look green and it needs to look sustainable. So if we can move on to the next slide, please. Now, obviously, we're already moving towards an electric future. I mean, this isn't new. I mean, Michael also took us through this. This is, objectives were set a few years back, and all of us have been taking important strides towards this. And we've been doing this through the increase in the weight of renewables in the generation mix, but also through an increased penetration of decentralized renewable generation, and obviously the electrification of consumption. Now, going to this point on decentralized renewable generation, because I think we see this as a very important point, a very important trend in what in what shapes the space and the opportunity and the support that electrical mobility requires. I mean, electrification, namely through mobility, is going to drive an increase in demand on our networks, and decentralized generation, storage and flexibility management will play a critical role in balancing out our networks and in addressing this increase in energy needs. As we rethink our cities and our communities and our mobility needs, decentralized renewable generation and the local energy communities, which have been increasingly regulated over the past few months, must be brought into the equation. Now, local energy communities are particularly important because they allow for a mass participation of consumers in distributed generation with lower acquisition costs. They reduce the required number of installations, and they make these installations bigger, and so obviously the cost per megawatt installed is reduced. And above all, with this increase in electricity demand, load and charging patterns brought about by e-mobility in particular, these local energy communities ensure a holistic view of the grid, leading to necessary efficiency gains. So local energy communities are actually under focus for us today. In fact, yesterday or a couple of days ago, we announced the first one in Portugal. A couple of weeks back, we had announced the first local energy community being set up in Spain, where we also operate, and they are actually at the forefront of our mobility agenda. If we can move to the next slide. So how do companies become eligible mobility players? And this is one of the points I made at the beginning. In our perspective, we have to connect the dots between customers, technology, and regulation. Energy clients' behavior has gone through tremendous change. A few years ago, all customers wanted was to make sure that their power was up and running and smoothly. Today, our clients are more aware of the impact of climate change and the need to change their own behavior. They're more sophisticated, and they're more predisposed to acquire and engage in more complex solutions. I mean, 1 out of every 3 house owners is actually interested in generating his own electricity over the next 5 years. And on top of that, these last 3 months have brought about, post-COVID, has brought about significant changes in everyone's behavior. Today at EDP, our clients are more interested than ever in our green energy tariffs and in solar solutions, both of which EDP feels it's in a privileged position to address as an integrated utility with a leading position in renewable generation. In regards to distributed generation, globally we have about 35,000 solar installations in customers, amounting to 150 megawatts, and we deliver approximately 19-20% savings to our customers through these solutions. And we've been working with these more sophisticated and more demanding customers, not just in solar, but in improving a service and solution portfolio that delivers energy efficiency, specialized technical services, which is very much in line with a recent European policy that has incentivized clients to look at their industrial processes, for example, to look for more efficient use of heat released from the industrial process. We work with them in integrated solutions for fleets, storage solutions, and everything we deliver more and more comes bundled with green energy contracts under a corporate PPA framework, because customers are looking for longer lasting and more stable energy deals with efficiency delivered as a service, and they're looking for a partner that is willing to invest in the initial investment in setting up these solutions, so that then they can share the efficiency gains through a longer period of time with a corporate PPA for renewable energy at its basis. When it comes to technology, advancements have been impressive, and I think Michael shared quite a few of those, namely batteries that keep getting better and less costly, as well as obviously EVs that are cheaper. And overseeing how these advancements will evolve, as well as understanding the best way to take advantage of them, we see is absolutely critical. So in this sense, how have we approached it? We've made a big effort of building an ecosystem of partnerships that will promote technological innovation. We set up a smart energy collab between the Portuguese academia and Accenture, for example. And this is a collab specifically with the ambition to develop new solutions that will accelerate the energy transition. We have a business unit called Edp Ventures that allows EDP to invest in startups such as, for example, Voltbras. That was it's a heavily digital company that manages charging networks in Brazil. We invested in Drive It, which offers an app capable to create powerful driving analytics, and it's actually embedded in our EVX app that I will go into in just a minute. So setting up this ecosystem, taking small participations in companies that will accelerate our own technological evolution and our own product and service pipeline is also a fundamental part of the equation. Last but not least, obviously regulation. I mentioned it a minute ago, and I think we've done a good job in Europe. We've been trying to create the right regulatory framework with the right incentives for renewable generation, for electrification, for the adoption of e-mobility, and now more than ever in this rebound period post-COVID, it is absolutely a determinant to the rate and speed at which we will be able to build this green rebound. So finally, and hoping to be able to keep my time because I didn't put the counter on until halfway through. If we can move to the next slide. Thank you. So in regards to EDP's agenda in particular, we're committed, and we've said this over time, we're committed to lead an energy transition that is fair and inclusive. Sustainability has been part of our DNA for over a decade. When we started to invest in renewables more than 10 years ago, we're currently global leaders in renewable energy. Today, 80% of our generation comes from renewables, and we've assumed our ambition to reach 90% in 2030. In fact, regarding this topic, we've decided to speed this up, and yesterday we announced a clinical buy for this path, with the acquisition of Viesgo, the fourth largest company in electricity networks in Iberia, also with renewable assets, and we hope this will reshape our Iberian portfolio, focusing in assets that can move the energy transition forward. We also announced the end of our biggest coal plant in Iberia, also 2 days ago, and we were anticipating that closure by 2 years. So we're closing in January, if everything goes well. And to partially fund this acquisition, we launched a 1 billion euro rights issue yesterday, because we need to keep moving forward, to keep investing in assets that promote this energy transition. Now, we know the energy revolution that started upstream is now moving downstream, and in mobility, EDP is focused on answering identified customer pain points that may be preventing clients from opting for an EV or adopting new mobility patterns. And one of the main pain points today is charging. And so addressing it means we've been creating a wide public charging network. How? Through partnerships with key players across different sectors that will allow us to leapfrog in terms of reach for this public charging network. We've partnered with service stations such as BP and Repsol in Iberia. We've partnered with sports clubs, and where we deployed this fully integrated project, including solar generation and EV charging into sports clubs, Sporting and Benfica, because this is how our customers understand the energy transition. It's not just about mobility, it's about bringing together renewable generation, be it through distributed generation or a green energy tariff, and bundling it together with a charging solution. Under the same challenge, obviously, we want to respond to customer charging needs of our customers most of their times, and post-COVID, most of their times is actually being spent at home. So this has obviously also given us a little bit of a twist in terms of charging locations. So we've been developing our portfolio for single-family households, where our portfolio is currently under expansion to cater for all customer needs, from the lower end and lower priced charging solutions to the higher end with more features, functionalities, and design. We've also been expanding our portfolio for condominiums and with shared garages, which is a very specific need, and for companies. And for condominiums and companies, we actually launched a platform called EV Charge. We launched during the confinement. It's an app-based digital platform created to help condominiums and companies effectively manage private access charging points. The solution presents a combination of new and digital technologies. It's a combination of an app, a built-in e-wallet for payment conciliation, and an easy interface with the charger that works offline, very important in garages, without an internet connection, that allows users to charge the EV and pay automatically in a very simple way. For condominiums, EV Charge individualizes the electricity consumption for each tenant and then provides automatic cost settlement between EV users and the condominium. And for electric fleets, for corporate electric fleets, It allows fleet managers to manage chargers, users, consumptions, and payments through a single platform, because this consumer experience is absolutely key when it comes to mobility. So finally, to build the confidence for the transition and support the decision, customers' decision regarding EV adoption, we also launched an app called EVX. It was launched actually in 2018, and EVX provides users with the information on potential financial savings and carbon reductions if they decide to opt for an EV vehicle, an electric vehicle. It's available for free throughout Europe and Brazil, for Android, for iOS, and it's recorded today more than 8 million kilometers and close to 450,000 trips of customers who introduce their mobility patterns and then receive feedback in terms of, if you were to use an EV car for this sort of behavior, where would you be able to charge? How much would you be saving? How much CO2 would you be saving? And saying how many trees would you be planting in an equivalent sense? So this is a very quick, to try to keep to my time, very quick overview of how we see the mobility challenge, how we feel we need to think about it, and what we've actually been doing in terms of our agenda and our portfolio for our customers. Thank you, Peter. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Vera. That was quite a comprehensive presentation, and thank you to both our keynote speakers who joined us, as I mentioned earlier, for our panel discussion. We now have more than 350 participants, it seems, on board. So I think it's high time we move to the panel debate as well, because we have quite the prominent speakers with us today. And you have a chance to add some questions as well. But let me first introduce them. Let's try to get them on screen as I introduce them. So first, we have Daniel Mess, who works in the cabinet of Executive Vice President Franz Timmermans on the European Green Deal on transport. Hi, Daniel. We have also Thierry Mortier, who is the Global Innovation Lead for Energy at Ernst & Young, where he guides the transition of energy companies in developing new business models and growth strategies. Hi, Thierry. And last but not least, we have Doron Frenkel, who is an experienced entrepreneur in the areas of EV charging, telecom, and fleet industries. He's the founder and CEO of Drives. So perhaps I can kickstart the discussion here by going in the same order I introduced you and ask you, what are some of the first reactions to the presentations that you just heard? And what is this really one thing that got your attention that you would like to share something on that first? So Daniel, if you want to start maybe with your first reactions. Daniel, we cannot hear you.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes, please go
Yeah,
ahead.
thanks. I'm very pleased to be at this seminar, which involves both mobility and energy experts. And thanks a lot for these fascinating presentations from leaders in the field, a man and a woman. Also very important to share the thoughts how we get this done. I'm actually very pleased that the points that we're discussing right now really tie in very well with an announcement that we made last week, which is the sector integration, the system integration strategy that we announced together with the hydrogen strategy. And I always say, hydrogen may be seen as the rock star of the recovery, but the energy system integration is actually the silent hero, the one that you have to have a closer look and think a bit about more, but it may actually save the day in going to a climate neutral future. Because for the climate neutral future, we really need to think about our energy systems, across the systems actually, and across the sectors that use the energy. Mobility and energy need to get together to get to that future. And so, we need to get our eVision for energy and mobility absolutely right. There is no other choice. We need to get this one right. And I've heard fascinating things already that show that people are really also on the ball, and that's very inspiring to hear. So will we be. We will do our best to make that vision also really happen. I think that Vera was absolutely right that all the things need to come together, the customers, the technologies, but also the regulations from our side. If you see like the customers and their taste still, despite also the difficult situation after COVID-19, the taste, if you ask them for electric mobility, is still there. In my own home country, the Netherlands, the incentive scheme for electric cars that was established, half of the cars, half of the premiums already went away within a day. People were really very keen to buy their electric car, and it's where it's moving. And of course, the technologies need to be there as well. So that's why we made the choice, as Michael also said, Europe's choice for the recovery is a green one, and it means also investing in battery technologies to bring down the cost even further, but also investing in the charging infrastructure, which is important. That's why we really made sure that charging infrastructure is also an integral part of the system integration strategy. You may have to read it also a few times, this passage, but there's really some important stuff in there, because what we're actually promising is that we will regularly and really periodically, every time we can also come out with a funding call that includes charging infrastructure, we will take stock. We will take a snapshot of what are the funding opportunities available and what does our regulatory environment to get there look like. The regulatory environment, European, national, local. Are we still on track to reach not only the target of 1 million public chargers by 2025, but are we getting there to have a comprehensive network of chargers? A network that is not only along our highways, but also in our cities, what Vera also mentioned. That is, we explicitly say that our eVision for charging infrastructure is to also have it in the depots, in the public buildings, in the offices, and indeed in the homes. So that snapshot that we want to do is very important. Including in the funding and the regulatory environment. And when it comes to like the demand for vehicles, the regulation will go its way. As Commissioner Breton and my own boss, Frans Timmermans, said very clearly, we are not backing down on our CO2 standards for cars.
That's good to hear. That's good to hear, absolutely.
We will come back on this in June 2021, and we will come with a pathway to zero emission mobility from 2025 onwards. So this is also like a note to what Michael already said, we need to invest our way out of this crisis. And in our view, the good way is the green recovery. And I hope that everybody will get that memo.
Well, this is a very positive sign of leadership on your behalf. And I actually have a question that I will pose to you now, if you don't mind, because there is the whole strategy, and it seems that technology costs are dropping and all the actors are willing to contribute and collaborate. We hear the announcements by OEMs, and also obviously the role of the utilities is quite big here. But from the side of the Commission and from your perspective in particular, what do you think are some specific policy adjustments that can get us there, that can accelerate that transition? And not just in the fleet electrification discussion, but even more generally speaking, because, for example, the energy integration strategy discusses buildings as well.
Yeah, like there are different things that are really important here. Like in this phase going forward, I think that's talking about possible joint investments is really important. And I take a lot of inspiration also what Vera already said about like some of these joint investments happening, by which I mean, investments that take account both of, if we, for instance, roll out charging infrastructure or renew all our corporate fleets, how can we also invest at the same time in the energy system to be ready for it? And the cars are both a challenge, but also a massive opportunity. If you get this right, the car is the emergent new energy source, energy provider of the future. By 2050, 15% of the daily flexible energy can come from cars if we get this right. So to me, it seems that in the immediate economic recovery phase, if you convince, depending on the deal in the European Council, of course, but if you manage to convince European countries to put in their national investment plans joint projects, where you have we roll out charging infrastructure, for instance, we help cities and companies in the fleet renewal, and at the same time we invest in an energy grid that can receive them both as a supply taker and a supply force, that is really a potential winner for the green recovery in the European Commission's view. So that is important. I think that the skills agenda will be very important for the European Commission to take account, because I think that electrification, if you see the developments both in the energy and mobility field, electrification will be the key skill to have for many people. So the skills agenda needs to be there. And coming back on your question on buildings, I think that's a very important one. That's why we put it also in the system integration study, that when we take this snapshot of the regulatory environment, we also look at what is happening when we renovate our shopping malls, our buildings, our multi-home dwellings. How can you take account of the need for more electric mobility? I think that snapshot of the regulatory environment can also really help in many ways. The Energy Performance in Buildings Directive already has an obligation for member states to look at possible obstacles to electric mobility, and if we take a snapshot, that can inspire some of that work. In the European semester, where we make recommendations to countries what they should do about their regulatory environment, sustainable transport is in all of them, in all the national recommendations that we've made.
And I think actually in the context of the European economy, we see also that the decisions being taken by the European Commission sort of give a very positive outlook for investors as well. And with that, I actually want to throw the ball right now to Thierry, who actually works with a lot of those companies that have to diversify their assets and develop new services and platforms. So Thierry, I have actually a question for you. When we talk about the different segments of vehicles that would electrify, which ones do you think come first? Which segments do you think come first?
Well, we've actually done quite some analysis around that to try to understand what acceleration in EV and electric mobility really means. Obviously also post COVID-19, and I share the views of Michael earlier, that there will be a different world with probably a bit more attention for micro mobility and individual transport. And at the same time, probably a shift in the parity points that we've calculated pre-COVID-19. Still, acceleration, I think, is needed. I think Vera gave a few good examples of very good initiatives, but across the board, if we talk to energy companies, including power utilities, most of them are still struggling to get this to scale. And in that acceleration exercise, we've looked at the different value pools that we deem valid for making money in this industry. So where exactly can you make money? And we looked at different things like batteries, we looked at charging infrastructure, at customer solutions, but also at fleet transition. So and we, as EY, believe that fleet transition is one value pool that will probably be the one that will help accelerate electrification of transport.
Yeah. Which exact segments are you looking at within the different fleets? So, for example,
well, so we looked at B2b and B2C. We've done some work actually with Duke Energy, and we've published on that. It's available online at all the different segments in all the different states in the US, and we calculated TCO analysis and parity points for each of them. And we also looked at the different business models that will help us gaining money from that, for example, through vehicle to grid. And in that portfolio, I think what really stands out is the B2b fleet. We do see now almost a rush on B2b fleets, say public transport, taxi fleet, but also commercial fleet, and a high interest from a lot of energy companies to try to conquer those fleets. Now, the problem with those fleets are that they're very heterogeneous. You have a small amount of very big ones, and then a large amount of very small ones. So addressing them is not that straightforward. And there again, we are working with our clients to understand the buying behaviors of EV fleets in this space. But the numbers, if you look at the numbers for B2B segments, Bloomberg New Energy Finance says 70% of the fleet will be, by 2040, bus fleet will be electrified, 56% of light commercial fleet, and 31% of medium-sized commercial fleet. So these are big numbers. And again, I observe an urgency in the market to start to conquer those fleets as a launching platform almost for electrification of transport.
No, especially, I mean, the numbers are quite big, and we need to get there fast. So there are a lot of questions about how we also manage that charging process. And I think here I'll turn to Doron, who actually is doing that for in his company. So how do you actually, as a company, make that happen? Like, what are the limits that we have for EV charging, for example, and what are some of the main aspects of what you do, if you could summarize it?
Sure. So first of all, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here and really amazing presentations so far. So a bit about us. We are a pure software player, so we are building the technology, the operating system behind EV charging. We currently are managing tens of thousands of chargers, hundreds of thousands in roaming, and we have over 700,000 drivers on the platform. So we can see some scalability, certainly big in the EV space currently. We believe that the most important piece is, first of all, the driver, whether a private driver or fleet driver. We have a lot of issues and things to fix before you get to the right scale. So range anxiety is one of them. So you want to get to a charger, but it's so frustrating to get to a charger and it doesn't work.
My question was more about the actual management of the charging. I mean, range anxiety is something that is obviously going away,
No,
right? We're talking about managing the charging process.
I'm touching that. So if you look at the range anxiety, the first thing that you look at is when you get to the charger, if it doesn't work, you have a major issue. And what we found out is the chargers are not as stable as you like them to be. So the first thing that we need to do before billing and roaming and energy management is to find the issues on the chargers. And what we figured out is how to understand the issues of the chargers and also how to fix it automatically. So we have self-healing algorithms that fix things in over 80% of the cases that can be fixed automatically. We fix that remotely. So it's about the stability of the charger. It's about self-healing. It's about scalability. So how can you scale up when you have a network? For instance, if you talk about roaming, we recently integrated between EVgo, the largest fast charging network in the US, which are our customers, and ChargePoint. So suddenly you have huge networks joining up together to provide roaming for the drivers. And we are doing that in Europe for years with the different platforms in Europe. And beyond that, it's about how do you support an entire ecosystem. So you need to support the charger and manage the chargers, the operators, the utilities, the gas and oil companies, the retailers. It's a complicated business. And we're doing that with many companies, like we are doing fleet management solutions with Centrica, gas and oil solutions with MOL and with Gilbarco, energy solutions with companies like ESB and Chess. And now you get into the fleets. And when you get into the fleet managers want that everything will work for them for the car. They need the cars to be able to do their stuff, what they are aimed to do. So it's about looking at a different phase of it. It's not about the charging, is whether the car charged on time. And it's alerts if the car was not charged on time. It's about energy management. Do you not have enough energy in the location, in the facility? How do you manage that? And we are managing today different types of fleets for our customers, starting with fleets like Maven, the car sharing of GM, or Uber, or delivery vans and taxis. So we have all this mix, and it's totally different behavior. It's totally different behavior from the fleet manager's perspective, from the facility manager perspective. So we have built tools to enable them to have self-healing, self-service tools. Everything needs to work for them. They don't want to care about the issues. They don't want to get to a station and the plug is stuck, and then you need to wait for some service. They want it to be up and running. And then the next thing is the energy management and how you tie the energy revolution to this section.
I think there's quite a huge appetite to actually, when we charge, also to close the circle by having integrated renewable energy in the whole process. And here I might actually jump to Vera, because I know that EDP is actually working in that direction. Could you a bit elaborate, maybe shed us some light on what exactly, from the perspective of utilities, defines the decision whether or even if to use renewables, or also how to do it, whether you simply use renewables through different certification schemes, or just linking directly with renewable energies as well for larger fleets?
Right. So yes, the demand for renewable energy has been increasing over time across our customer base. Now, obviously, this can be addressed by several mechanisms. We either have the certification of the energy that we deliver to our customers, and a lot of the customers that's the kind of product that they want to take. They'll subscribe to a green tariff that is certified, that comes from a clean energy source. But we also have customers who actually demand a physical physical, a physical corporate PPA, and so we link that to specific renewable energy projects. And these are contracts that typically have a longer lasting duration, from 10 to 15 years, and they actually have a back-to-back with a specific either solar or wind project from our business unit EDP Renewables, and that is happening not just with mobility customers, but obviously across our entire customer base. When it comes to fleets in particular, and I actually relate very closely to what Thierry said when he mentioned that fleets are very heterogeneous, and in fact they are. So we have very different types of customers. As Thierry said, we have we have a small number of customers with very large fleets, and then a large number of customers with very small fleets. Now, what does this require? This requires a portfolio of services, of integrated services, and I mentioned that in my speech because, in fact, it is really important. More and more customers will come to us, as Doran mentioned. Customers will come to us with, looking for an integrated solution that will come with your energy contract, your infrastructure, a platform that allows you to manage your different cars, and in some cases also with the investment required to electrify your fleet and to replace your carbon fossil cars. So a flexible portfolio with different use cases. Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. I was just wondering if having those integrated systems means also that it's becoming cheaper to use renewables. Is it the case already? Is it cheaper to integrate renewables now with the charging process? It's a yes or no question that I'm asking here.
Is it cheaper? Well, when you have, it is cheaper. If a corporate PPA over a large period of time with a specific project to back it up, obviously is an interesting project. And an interesting price offer for a customer that is willing and in fact interested in taking up that sort of commitment. So yes.
All right. Well, that's quite the positive sign, I think, as well. And I'll actually go back to Michael as well, also for something that I want to pick up from his slides. He mentioned that you have also the decisions of the OEMs to move towards electrification. Is becoming a no-brainer solution for them. We see Volkswagen debunking myths even these days on the efficiency of electric vehicles. So my question here would be, what exactly would you advise, for example, policymakers and all the other people that are here in the room today with us on how do we make the most out of this commitment of the automotive industry to transform? How do we help them do that faster? Because obviously we see that still one of the biggest missing factors is the lack of vehicles. Going back to the control room, can we see if we can unmute Michael?
Okay, thank you. Sorry, somebody muted me. Dangerous stuff. So I think, first of all, let me just say, I think this is tremendous. When I hear the sort of integrated vision of Vera at EDP, and I hear the detailed work that Doran and his team are doing on, just solving the little frictions. I remember 1995 when pictures would download from the internet one line at a time. And now I can schedule film night with my kids and we can watch online videos, right? And that's a 25-year period in digital communications. And we're just in the middle of a similar process with electrification and digitization and smartification of transport. So, when you say, how do you speed this up? Partly what you do is you wait and you let the policymakers, people like Daniel, and you let, Vera and her team, and you let Doran just do their thing, and they will thread together and they will wire this thing up. And there will be, there will be enough chargers in the same way that there is now enough bandwidth to do video night with your kids, So to a certain extent, I'm just very relaxed. And I say, well, what is my advice? My advice is, well, don't wait passively, but wait and do things, do the obvious next thing, and we will get where we need to be. A few things, though, that I would say. First of all, it would be really helpful if we could get some kind of clarity. I know that I'm going to sound like a broken record. This question of hydrogen, and Daniel referred to it, hydrogen is the rock star. Hydrogen is not the rock star. Hydrogen is the mirage of the oasis that's always over the horizon, but that doesn't actually solve any problem today. And therefore, talking about it, and I was, when I was on the board of Transport for London, and we had 100 electric buses, and Shenzhen had 16,000, and I said, can we please accelerate the electrification of buses? Right, get the electricity into the depots. Help. We've got 9,000 buses in London. We're the biggest market for buses probably in the world, or one of them. Can we just do that? Oh, wait, because we are also running some fuel cell buses, and we need to see if that works. And we've got to experiment, and we mustn't make any rash. No, anything urban, anything that does, any vehicle that doesn't drive more than 300 miles regularly, just electrify the damn thing. And I think getting that clarity from policymakers would really help. We still see, I'm afraid, the commissioner going and doing a photo shoot with hydrogen filling stations, retail hydrogen filling stations. For what? For what? Right? They're not going to be used. Maybe commercial vehicles, maybe, but let's get that clarity. The second thing is, we've talked about quite a bit, fleets. Fleets are accelerating. Thierry, you said it, the B2B, you named my old team, the Bloomberg New Energy Finance team's figures. Fleets are going to go really, really fast because the total cost of ownership story already makes sense. So fleets are going to go fast, but what we need is more Dorons, or maybe Doron needs to do more work on identifying the grid bottlenecks that fleet electrification will entail. I'll give you an example. I talked to a big supermarket, and we talked about electrifying their commercial fleets, their drayage, their big trucks, little trucks, most of which travel short distances, could easily be electric. And if you say to them, well, 97% of the time, there'll be absolutely no problem charging them. You'll be able to maybe change your service regimes, but you'll be able to charge them 97% of the time with no problem. And they look at you and they say, yeah, but if the 3% is just before Christmas, what am I supposed to tell my shareholders? You really need to do the details of recharging, not just overnight and optimization, but all through the year, hot summer, cold summer, when there's a power outage, when there's Christmas, when there's a national holiday which falls on a Friday, unusually also on a month. Who knows? All of these edge cases need to be thought through. When all of that happens during the beast from the east, the very cold snap that might come in from Siberia, right? So we need to get all of these edge cases, not just range anxiety, but resilience anxiety. That's what I suffer from, resilience anxiety. And then finally, what I would say about the advice around the decarbonization, we have to go deep in locations. And I think, Thierry, you mentioned, shopping centers, mixed use real estate developments, and even at the level of towns and cities and business parks, we will not get to the climate goals that the Commission, I'm hoping Daniel is still listening, he's not on the video at the moment. We won't get there by every location doing 2, 3, 5% per year. What we need is a few locations to accelerate towards deep decarbonization. I call them pathfinder cities or pathfinder towns, pathfinder villages, pathfinder business estates, where we really say, and I would go to Vera and say, Vera, what would you do if you took a moderate size European town, maybe a Bruges or maybe a Dundee or something like that, and said, how would you go 100% net zero? How would you electrify that? What batteries do you need? What transport do you need? What changes in user behavior do you need? What heating systems do you need? Because the answers to that will then inform how we go economy-wide. So instead of slicing always like this, go deep in a few places. So those are my 3 bits of advice. Clarity, decarbonizing locations, and fleets and fleet/resilience.
I think this really opens up the role of local actors. I mean, cities in particular, they have massive responsibilities to enable that. And we see some very ambitious cities, but in the end, when we talk about policy, you know, at the European level, that also goes to the national level, has to be implemented. So we should not be just talking to the Commission here, but we should be also reaching out to the local actors. And this is something that Electric has been doing actually. And we've identified some very interesting projects in terms of decarbonization, but also skills. And with that being said, I just want to say that we're running a bit over time, but I see that we still have a lot of people with us, so quite a lot of interest. And I'll try to ask a few questions. We have one for Thierry, who is being asked. So the power industry is decarbonizing, but it seems that they still need to do more. What exactly is that? So the question to Thierry is, what do you think is the main action that the power sector should do in this transition?
Well, I think you already partially answered, but for me, there are two reflections on this. I think, first of all, it's absolutely crucial to start winning in the market, and to be able to win in the market, I think you need to overcome a couple of hurdles. I think some of them have been referred. We as EY, we see three important ones. First of all, I think the massive infrastructure challenge that is still ahead of us in terms of charging poles, but also batteries and so on. So overcoming that, I think, is crucial. And we've seen actually a good example of China when we went on an e-mobility trip there, and we looked at what EV at scale really means. And it was quite astonishing to see what State Grid China had put in place to basically get the infrastructure challenge sorted. They have already 1 million charging points, another million coming up in 2021, and they have really brought this to scale. So that's one. Secondly, I think there is still a lot of work to be done, especially for some players like power utilities, to conquer the hearts and the minds of the consumer. So there is still a convincing the customer challenge. And then the third one, not surprisingly, that's one where we focus on a lot, is the investability and the financing of the whole EV part. We believe that there will be a need to come up with some solutions like fractional ownership, solutions that will calculate the residual value of batteries and so on. There's a numerous set of things around the financing of EVs that are, I think, important to be fixed. And all of them, in most cases, can only be fixed, I think, through collaboration of different players. In a webinar that we've run a couple of weeks back, we've surveyed about 160 clients. 75% of them told us that they are not able to fix any type of EV solution end-to-end on their own. So they do appreciate that collaboration is required. And that is, for most companies, still a little bit a thing out of their comfort zone. Yeah, starting to work.
So you mean the end-to-end platforms for all of that?
Exactly. Alongside that, I think building an ecosystem to basically pull in small components of solutions, as Michael and Dora mentioned, is also absolutely required. And we've seen that in China.
I think what you're referring to is something that Doron actually is dealing with. So is this dialogue that we need to promote between all those players. And maybe I can just quickly wrap it up with the last quick question to Doron. What is the main difficulty you see in getting all those people together? I mean, not just the businesses, but also policymakers, if that's relevant sometimes. What do you think is the biggest hurdle for you?
So as you said, the issue is, how do you connect everyone? How do you understand what are the major issues that you want to solve, and how do you solve it? And I'll give you an example. We're talking about electrification. What if we'll succeed? Can the grid cope with it? So how do you connect the different players, the fleets, and the grid operators to make sure that there is enough power? What if not? So we have a European project, Horizon 2020 project, in the Netherlands, Germany, and Austria, which is all about connecting mass-scale deployment of EV charging into the grid. You need different protocols, you need different behavior. So when you look at the local grid, you need to be able to connect what all the players here said. You need to connect batteries and renewables, and you need to connect the EVs, and you need to define, when do you charge? How do you split the charge? How do you prioritize? How do you make sure that you have enough energy? How do you make sure that you get energy from renewables? So we have solutions around it, and we are just coping with that. And there are so many players that we need to talk when doing it. So you need the grid operators. There is one protocol, OpenADR, and you have the local facility manager that needs their solution. So it's getting all the
But
parties.
you're saying that the dialogue is happening already. So we're already in this dialogue, and the transition is happening.
I think that what I've seen from this panel, I saw commitment. So the people are committed. There are people that wants to make it happen. Now it takes time. It's not in a day. I'm in this business for over 8 years now, so we see the progress. We've started with EDP a long time ago with the Free Electrons project, which was great. And so we see a lot of stuff that is being built, and now we are connecting the dots. But again, we need to work fleet by fleet, different types of fleets, and it's about energy management and mobility all together. How to link it.
Great.
We're speaking with a lot of.
I think that's great to hear. You know that we also have. I see here more than 200 people still on our call right now listening to us, and that still confirms the interest that really people from all different spectrums are interested in that transition, making it happen and accelerating it. And with that being said, I'm really sorry to cut everyone off, but we've been 15 minutes over our time limit already, and I'm getting some calls from the control room to quickly wrap it up. So I actually want to ask you, all of you, one quick conclusion. If you could summarize how to accelerate the transition in one sentence, who wants to take that question first? One sentence only.
So I'll give you back half a minute because I already said my 3 things.
I would say collaboration.
I would just iterate.
No, go ahead, Trevi. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say the same, Doron. So, I think it's all about the collaboration, and it's widely recognized in the market.
Yeah.
I'd go back to one of the sentences that I used. It's about connecting the dots between customers, technology, and regulation. If we can do that, we can push it forward.
Daniel, we cannot hear you.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Like I think that I totally see like the partnership is really the important thing, because the thing is, we can talk about like obstacles at local, national, European level to get all of this done, but the best way to convince also even a local politician do this is just to have a very good project and say, listen, this is a very good idea, this is jobs, this is the future, this is what you want. That's the best way to do it. So that's the partnership. And Michael, it's a bit, I can't react to your point on hydrogen. Nobody is saying nobody's saying don't do electrification. There was a reason why I said system integration electrification is the silent hero, and we should all together give it superpowers it needs.
Yeah. Well, I think the main message is clear. We need to discuss. We need to collaborate. We need to partner up. And I see here that we have a few events coming up where we'll be doing exactly that. But if we go to the next slide, I want to so those are some upcoming webinars of ours that, of course, you're welcome to join. Quite some interesting topics that we discussed there. But regarding the discussion that we had today, I think this event that we plan to have next year in February is something exactly for this purpose. We want to connect the dots, we want to build partnerships, and the event will be a place for do that. We want to have this electricity playground where all the actors will come together, connect the dots, collaborate, and form new partnerships, because in the end, there's only so much that policy can do. We need to have businesses with responsible and future-proof investments going strong about electrification. With that being said, I want to thank all of the panelists and also the participants to this webinar. This was all for today. Let us know on Twitter, LinkedIn with your impressions from the webinar, and stay tuned for more announcements regarding our upcoming webinars, upcoming events, and of course the eVision event February next year. Get in touch if you're interested to participate. And again, also a big thank you goes to the speakers and the Eurelectric team for this webinar. Until next time, goodbye everyone.
Right.
Bye.
Just as an aside, the slides will be available at our website, and you'll be able to find them there.